Richard had a way of introducing his wife at parties. He would place his hand briefly on her shoulder, a gesture that looked like affection and functioned like punctuation, and say, "This is Clare. She keeps the house running." As if that were the full measure of a person, as if that were all there was to know. And in less than 60 seconds, he was going to do it again, in front of every person in that room whose opinion he had spent 15 years trying to earn, for the last time. What Richard did not know, what he had never once asked, was who Clare had been before she became his wife. And the night he found out in front of every person in that room whose opinion he had spent 15 years trying to earn. Hi, I'm Luna, and this is Poppy. Today's story is about a woman who was reduced for 15 years to a version of herself that fit inside someone else's idea of what a wife should be. It's about what happens when the full picture finally comes into view, and about the particular silence that falls when a room understands it has been looking at someone completely wrong. Stay with us. If you've ever been reduced to just one version of yourself, while knowing there was so much more inside you, this story is for you. Stay until the end. Clare Ellison had been married to Richard for 15 years. They had met at 26 when she was finishing a graduate degree in international development. And he was 2 years into building what would become a successful commercial property firm. They had met at a dinner party, the kind where everyone is performing a version of their most impressive self, and Richard had been charming and certain and had made her feel, that first evening, like the most interesting person in the room. She had found out later that he made most people feel that way. It was a skill. Like many skills, it worked best when you didn't examine it too closely. They had married at 28. The plan, her plan, articulated clearly and agreed to at the time, was that she would finish her doctorate, complete a field posting she'd been working toward for 3 years, and then they would figure out the rest together. The doctorate she had finished. The field posting had not happened. There had been reasons, good ones at the time. Richard's firm was growing fast and required his full attention. The timing wasn't right. They were talking about children. The posting was in a difficult region. He had said this with genuine concern, and she had believed the concern was genuine, because it was. And then there had been her mother, Eleanor, who had been diagnosed with a progressive illness the year they married, and whose care had gradually, quietly, become part of the architecture of Clare's days. Clare had not resented any single decision. She had simply, across 15 years, made a series of choices that each seemed reasonable in the moment and that had accumulated, collectively, into a life that looked nothing like the one she had been building before she met him. She had not stopped thinking. She had not stopped caring about the things she had always cared about. She had simply moved those things to a different part of herself, the part that didn't require an audience. She still read, ostensibly and in 3 languages. She still wrote, not academically, but carefully. In notebooks she kept in the drawer of her desk in the room Richard called her study and had never once entered. She still corresponded with the colleagues and professors from her graduate years, many of whom had gone on to significant careers in the field she had left. She still knew things, deeply, specifically, with the particular texture of someone who has spent 20 years thinking seriously about a subject. Richard did not know any of this, not because she had hidden it, because he had never asked. What he didn't know would cost him everything. Not everything in the dramatic sense, in the more permanent sense, the version of himself he had been comfortable being. She had her own way of marking time, not with milestones or calendars, with the particular texture of accumulated thought, the way a subject deepens when you return to it over years, when you bring new experience to old questions and find that the questions have opened rather than closed. She had been 23 when she first encountered the research that would become her life's work. A single paper read in the reading room of a university library on a winter afternoon. that had described the gap between humanitarian policy and humanitarian reality with a precision that felt, to her, like recognition. That was the word. Recognition. Not just comprehension. The sense that this was a problem she was built to think about. She had spent 20 years proving that instinct correct. In the doctorate. In the field research before her mother's diagnosis. In the notebooks. In the long, quiet hours when the house was still and she could hear herself think, the pattern had established itself gradually, the way patterns do, not through any single decision, but through the steady accumulation of small moments that each seemed insignificant and that together composed something significant. At parties, Richard talked. He was good at it. He had a natural fluency in the currency of professional conversation, deals, decisions, the landscape of commercial ambition. People found him engaging. He was engaging. Clare listened. She asked questions. She remembered what people told her and followed up, the next time she saw them, with specific recollections that made people feel seen. She was, by any measure, the more attentive person in the room. She was also, consistently, the least visible. Richard had a habit, unconscious, she had decided, though the distinction had stopped mattering some years ago, of speaking over her. Not dramatically, not with raised voice or obvious interruption. With the particular confidence of someone who has decided, below the level of conscious thought, that their contribution to a conversation is more important than whoever was speaking before them. At a dinner with colleagues from Richard's firm, Clare had been describing, briefly, and in response to a direct question, the situation in a region she had been following closely for 2 years. She had said perhaps 4 sentences when Richard had touched her arm and said, lightly, "Clare follows the news very closely. It's a hobby of hers. A hobby." She had a doctorate. She had spent 15 years reading primary sources in 2 languages about exactly this region. She corresponded regularly with researchers who were cited in international policy documents. He had called it a hobby. She had looked at him. He had already moved on to something else. He had not noticed her looking. She had picked up her wine glass. She had thought, he genuinely doesn't know. And then, more quietly, he has never tried to. That had been 18 months ago. She had not stopped thinking about it since. And that word, hobby, was about to follow him into every room he had ever tried to impress. The word hobby had done something to her that more obvious slights had not. Because it wasn't hostile. It wasn't dismissive in the way that announces itself as dismissal. It was something quieter and more total. It was the word of a person who had genuinely categorized her, filed her, and moved on. There was no malice in hobby. There was only the complete absence of curiosity, the assumption that what he knew about her was what there was to know, the particular confidence of someone who has stopped looking because they believe they have already seen everything. She had thought about her doctoral supervisor, Professor Mensa, who had once said, "The most dangerous assumption in research is thinking you already understand the subject." Clare had been 24 when she heard that. She was 41 now, and she understood for the first time that it applied to people too. The Ashford Foundation Gala was held on the 3rd Friday of November. It was the kind of event Richard attended strategically, not for the charity, though he made a respectable donation, but for the room. The Ashford Gala had a specific guest list, and being on it said something. Clare had attended every year for 12 years. She knew the staff by name. She had, 3 years ago, quietly organized a volunteer coordination effort that had significantly improved the Foundation's community outreach, an effort that had been credited, in the Foundation's annual report, to the organizing committee, of which she was technically a member. Richard did not know she had done this. She had mentioned it once. He had been on his phone. They arrived at 7:30. Richard immediately found the cluster of people he was looking for, Graham Ashford himself, 2 property developers whose work overlapped with his own, a city councilwoman whose infrastructure plans were relevant to 3 of his current projects. Clare took a glass of wine from a passing tray. She found the executive director of the foundation, a woman named Judith Chun, whom she had known for 8 years. They spoke for 20 minutes about the foundation's current initiatives, about a policy shift in the regional government that was affecting their work on the ground, about a researcher whose recent report had changed the way several organizations were approaching the problem. It was the best conversation Clare had had in months. It was the kind of conversation that reminded her who she was when she was allowed to be it. This was the moment everything began to shift. She didn't know it yet, but it had already started. Richard found her at the bar, refilling his drink, an hour into the evening. He had 2 colleagues with him, men she recognized, whose names she knew, whose families she had asked about at previous events. He said, "There you are. Gentlemen, my wife Clare. She's been... What have you been doing over there, darling?" He said it pleasantly, with a smile. He said it pleasantly, with a smile that meant nothing. One of the men said, "International development. That's a big space. What's your focus?" Before Clare could answer, Richard said, "Oh, Clare reads a lot about it. She's very well informed for someone outside the field." He said it the way you say something you consider to be a compliment. He said it with the light, easy confidence of a man who has never once considered that the woman beside him might know more about the subject than anyone else at the bar. The smile of a man who considers this a rhetorical question. Clare said, "Talking with Judith Chun about the Foundation's East Region Initiative," Richard said. "Judith runs the charity side. Clare volunteers. It gives her something to do." One of the men said, "That's great. Very admirable." The other had already begun a sentence about something else. Something to do. 15 years of thought, of reading, of correspondence with some of the most serious people working in this field. 15 years of thought, of reading, of correspondence with some of the most serious people working in this field. The man had already moved on. He had nodded once. That nod that means "I have heard you and filed you," and turned back to Richard. They talked about a property development on the east side of the city. Clare stood beside her husband holding her wine glass and was not spoken to again for 11 minutes. She counted. 11 minutes. She had learned to count them. She set her glass down. She looked straight ahead at the middle distance, at nothing in particular. The way you look when you are deciding something you have been deciding for a long time. That word, hobby, wasn't finished with him yet. Something to do. Clare looked at her husband. He was already engaged in the other conversation. He had not noticed that what he said was anything other than a pleasant introduction. She made a decision. Not impulsively. With the particular calm of someone who has been waiting for the right moment for a very long time, and who has just recognized it. If you've ever watched someone ignore everything you are, and reduce you to something smaller, leave a like on this story. Because moments like this, they stay. Clare had written her doctoral thesis on conflict-driven displacement in post-colonial East African regions. It had been cited in the years since in 43 academic papers, 2 policy reports submitted to international bodies, and 1 report that had been presented directly to a UN working group on humanitarian response. She had not published after the doctorate. Life had intervened in the ways life intervenes. But she had continued to read, to correspond, to think. She had, in the past 3 years, begun writing again carefully, in the notebooks in the study, essays that she had sent to exactly 2 people, her former doctoral supervisor, Professor Adora Mensah, now at Oxford, and a researcher named Patrick Levi, whose work on policy implementation she had been following for a decade. Professor Mensah had written back, after the first essay, with 3 pages of notes and a question. "When are you going to publish this?" Clare had said she would think about it. She had been thinking about it for 8 months. Patrick Levi had written back after the second essay to say that he had shared it, without identifying the author, with his research group, and that two of his colleagues had asked where it had been published because they wanted to cite it. She had sat with that for a long time, with what it meant, with what she had been doing to herself in the name of reasonableness across 15 years. Judith Chun was standing near the far window with two people Clare didn't recognize. When she saw Clare approaching, she excused herself and met her halfway. Judith said, "I was hoping I'd find you again. I wanted to ask, the paper you described earlier, the one on policy lag and humanitarian response, is that published anywhere?" Clare said, "Not yet." Judith said, "I ask because we have our annual symposium in March. We've been looking for a keynote speaker who can bridge the academic and operational sides, someone who understands both the research and how it actually functions or fails to function on the ground." She paused. "The person I had in mind pulled out last month. And what you described tonight is exactly what we need." Clare looked at her. Judith said, "Would you be willing to present? Formally, I mean." With the full academic framing, Clare said, "Yes." She said it before she had fully processed what she was agreeing to. She said it the way you say something when you have been waiting to say it, for a very long time, and the moment finally arrives, and the only honest answer is yes. She said it the way you say something when you have been waiting to say it for a very long time, and the moment finally arrives, and the only honest answer is yes. That was the last time she stayed silent. "About any of it?" Judith smiled. She said, "Wonderful. I'll have my team reach out this week with the details," she said. "I have to say, I've known you for 8 years, and I had no idea you were sitting on this." Clare said, "Most people don't." She said it without bitterness, just clearly. The way you say something true that you have carried a long time and are finally, carefully, setting down. The formal program began at 9 o'clock. The Foundation's board chair spoke about the year's work. 2 award recipients gave brief addresses, and then Judith Chun took the microphone to close the formal portion of the evening. She spoke about the Foundation's direction for the coming year. She mentioned the symposium in March. She said they had confirmed a keynote speaker, someone whose work sat at the exact intersection of rigorous research and practical impact, whose thinking had quietly shaped conversations in the field for 20 years without nearly enough recognition. She said, "I'm delighted to announce that Dr. Clare Ellison will deliver the keynote address at the Ashford Symposium in March." The room applauded. Richard, seated at the table with his colleagues, had looked up from the conversation he was having. He had heard his wife's name. He had heard the word doctor. He had heard the applause. He had looked at Clare. Clare was looking at Judith Chun with the composed expression of someone receiving something they have earned and are finally allowing themselves to accept. Richard said quietly, "Did she just call you doctor?" Clare said, "Yes." He said, "You have a doctorate?" She looked at him. She said, "I've had one for 13 years. Richard. The man to Richard's left, Graham Ashford himself, had half turned at the sound of the exchange. He said, "Remarkable woman, your wife. Judith's been trying to get her on the program for 2 years. Glad it finally worked out." He said it warmly, in the tone of someone offering a compliment. He did not know, because he could not have known, what those words landed on. Richard was very still. The applause had finished. The room had moved on to the next thing, but Richard had not moved. He was sitting with the particular stillness of a man who has just understood something that has been true for a long time. They drove home in silence for the first 8 minutes. Not the comfortable silence of 2 people who have run out of words for the night. The particular silence of a conversation that has not yet found its beginning. Richard said, "Why didn't you tell me?" Clare said, "Tell you what, specifically?" He said, "About the paper, about the symposium, about any of it." She was quiet for a moment. The city moved past them. She said, "I mentioned the volunteer work 3 years ago. You were on your phone." She said, I told you about the correspondence with Professor Mensa last spring. You said that was nice. She said, I told you the night before we flew to Milan that I had been writing again. You asked if I wanted the window seat. Richard said nothing. Claire said, I stopped telling you things about my work a long time ago. Not because I was hiding them, because you had made it clear in the way that people make things clear without saying them directly that you were not particularly interested. He said, that's not fair. She said, which part? He didn't answer. She said, tonight you told 2 of your colleagues that international development is a hobby of mine. You said I volunteer because it gives me something to do. You have said versions of those things in front of people for years. She said it without anger. That was the thing that made it land the way it did. She said it the way a person presents evidence, clearly, without performance, with the particular steadiness of someone who has had a long time to know exactly what they think. Richard said, I didn't know. She said, I know you didn't. She said, that's the part I've been sitting with. Richard did not sleep well that night. He had, in his professional life, a capacity for honest self-assessment that he considered one of his stronger qualities. He could look at a failing project and name what had failed. He could identify a poor decision and trace it to its source. He had built a successful firm partly on the willingness to do this, to look at an uncomfortable truth directly and respond to it rather than manage it. He had never applied this capacity to his marriage. He was applying it now. He thought about the dinner party and the word hobby. He thought about the times he had spoken over her in conversation and moved on before she could finish it. He thought about the study he had never entered, the notebooks he had never asked about, the colleagues whose names she mentioned and whom he had never asked her to tell him more about. He thought about the introduction he had given her at 100 parties. She keeps the house running, as if that were the full measure of a person, as if he had never considered that the person running the house might be the most interesting person in it. He knocked on the study door on a Sunday morning. It was the first time he had knocked on that door. She said, come in. He came in. The room was smaller than he had imagined. The walls were lined with books, not decorative books. Books with broken spines and flagged pages, and the particular density of things that have been used. On the desk, a laptop, a stack of notebooks, a cup of tea that had gone slightly cold, and a printed draft of something covered in handwritten notes in the margins. He said, can I sit down? She said, yes. He sat in the chair across from her desk. He looked at the room. He looked at her. He said, tell me about the paper. She looked at him for a moment, checking, he understood, whether the question was genuine. She told him. For 40 minutes she told him about the research, where it had started, what she had found, what it meant for how organizations responded in the first critical months after displacement events, why the policy lag she had identified mattered, and what it cost in human terms. Richard listened. He did not interrupt. He did not check his phone, both of which were real questions. The kind that come from genuine engagement rather than the performance of it. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He had not looked at his phone. He had not shifted in the way people shift when they are waiting for a pause in which to speak. He had done the thing that was, she realized, rare for him. He had simply been in the room with what she was saying, without agenda, without the background hum of his own parallel thinking. She had noticed this. She had not said anything about it, but she had noticed. It was the first time in a long time that she had felt in a conversation with her husband that the words were actually landing, not bouncing off the surface of his attention. Landing, he said. I didn't know you were doing this. She said, I know. He said, that's my failure, not yours. He said it simply, without qualification or defense. The way a person states a fact they have arrived at through honest examination and are not interested in debating. Claire looked at her husband. He looked smaller in that chair than he usually did, not diminished. human, the particular human smallness of someone who has seen themselves clearly and is sitting with what they found. The symposium was held on the second Saturday in March. The room held 120 people, researchers, practitioners, policy advisors, foundation staff from 3 countries. Clare had prepared for 6 weeks. Not because the material was unfamiliar, she had been living with it for 20 years, but because she wanted to say it exactly right, because the people in that room deserved precision and she intended to give it to them. She spoke for 50 minutes. She presented the research clearly, specifically, without decoration. She described the policy lag she had identified, the 18-month gap between the arrival of displacement and the meaningful deployment of response, and what that gap costs in concrete human terms. She proposed a framework for early warning integration that 3 people in the room told her afterward. Individually, was the clearest articulation they had heard of something they had been struggling to name. The room was attentive in the way that rooms are attentive when something true is being said, not polite attention, real attention, the kind that goes quiet. Richard was in the 3rd row. He had asked if he could come. She had said yes. He had not said a word since they arrived. He had sat in the 3rd row and he had listened to his wife speak for 50 minutes, and he had understood, with a completeness that left no room for qualification, the scale of what he had not seen. Not just the research, the person, the full, specific, extraordinary person who had been in his house for 15 years and whom he had introduced, at 100 parties, as the woman who kept things running. When she finished, the applause was sustained. Not polite, the other kind. Richard did not applaud immediately. He sat for a moment with his hands in his lap. Then he applauded, and he did not stop for a long time. After the formal session ended, people came to speak with Clare, one by one at first, then in a small group, researchers with questions, practitioners with responses, 2 people who exchanged cards and asked if she was on any current projects. Richard stood nearby. He had a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. He watched his wife move through the conversation, precise, warm, completely at ease with the material, asking questions that made the other person feel that their work mattered and was being taken seriously. He watched her and he thought, I have been married to this person for 15 years, and I am only now meeting her. Judith Chun found him near the coffee station. She said, she's extraordinary, your wife. I hope you know that. Richard said, I'm learning. He said it without irony, with the specific humility of a man who means exactly what he says. Clare found him when the room had thinned. They walked out together into the early March afternoon. He said, I owe you an apology, a real one, not a summary. She said, I know. He said, I reduced you, for years, in public and in private. I reduced you to a role and I called it love, and I didn't notice the difference until someone else named you correctly in front of a room full of people. He said it clearly, without softening it. The way a person speaks when they have decided that honesty is the only currency that still works. Clare said, yes, she said, and I let it happen. I made myself smaller to make things easier, and I told myself it was practical. And I stopped telling you things because it was easier than watching you not listen. She paused. She said, that ends now, not as an ultimatum, as a fact, the kind of fact that has been waiting to be spoken for a long time. And that, once spoken, changes the shape of everything that comes after. Clare submitted the paper to a journal in April. It was accepted with minor revisions in June. It was published in September. Professor Mensa sent a message the day it went live that said simply, finally. Patrick Levi's research group cited it within the month. Judith Chun's foundation used the framework in a grant proposal that was funded in October. Clare began a second paper in July. She worked on it in the study, in the mornings, with the door open. Richard had started knocking before he entered, not as a performance of respect, as an actual practice of it. He had also, gradually and without announcing it, stopped introducing her at parties. He had started, instead, letting her speak first, and when someone asked who she was, he said, "She can tell you better than I can." At one dinner, a man had asked what Clare did. Richard had started to answer, the old answer, the reflex answer, and had stopped himself. He had felt the word forming and had felt, with it, the specific weight of everything it had cost. He had not said hobby. He had said, "Ask her," and then he had stepped back and listened. It was a small thing. It was also, Clare knew, not a small thing. It was the difference between being seen and being summarized, and she had spent 15 years being summarized. Eleanor had been living with the illness for 11 years. It had progressed slowly, the particular cruelty of a condition that moves at its own pace, indifference to plans or schedules, and she now spent most of her time in the chair by the window of her apartment, with her books and the particular quality of attention she had always given to things that mattered. She had always given that attention to Clare. Clare visited on Tuesdays and Fridays. She brought food and stayed for 2 hours, sometimes 3, and they talked with the particular ease of two people who have never needed to perform for each other. Eleanor had asked once about the notebooks in Clare's bag. Clare had told her briefly, the way she told most people, and Eleanor had said, "Show me." So she had shown her. She had opened the notebook to the beginning and explained. In the unhurried way you explain something to someone who is genuinely listening, what the research was about and why it mattered. Eleanor had listened without interrupting. She had asked 2 questions, careful, specific questions that came from someone who had been paying attention. When Clare finished, her mother had been quiet for a moment. Then she had said, "You've been carrying this a long time," Clare had said. "Yes." Eleanor had said, "And now it's going to be heard." It was not a question. It was the particular certainty of a woman who had known her daughter for 41 years and had never once doubted what she was capable of. Clare had looked at her mother. She had thought, "She has always known. Through the years, I put things aside. Through the choices that accumulated into a life I hadn't designed. She has always known what was in me, and she waited patiently for me to find my way back to it." Eleanor had come to the symposium. It had taken significant effort, the journey, the logistics, the particular determination of a woman who had decided she was going to be in that room regardless of what her body required to get her there. She had sat in the second row with her cane across her knees and her coat still on because the room was slightly cold, and she had not said a word about the cold. She had watched her daughter speak for 50 minutes. She had not moved. When it ended, she had not applauded immediately. She had sat very still with her hands in her lap. Then, slowly, she had begun to clap, and she had not stopped until the room had gone quiet. Clare had found her afterward, near the entrance. Eleanor had taken her daughter's hand and held it without speaking. She didn't need to say anything. She had said it all already in the chair by the window on a Tuesday afternoon, with the notebook open between them. In the particular certainty of someone who had always known and had never stopped believing. Clare had sat alone in the study that evening. She looked at the room, the books, the notebooks, the draft on the desk, the tea she had not finished. She thought, "This is the room that waited for me, all the years it waited, quiet and patient, and exactly as she had left it." She had always known it would still be here. That was the thing about real work. It doesn't go anywhere. It just waits for you to come back, without hesitation, without qualification, as the only honest answer. There is a kind of invisibility that happens inside love, not the dramatic invisibility of being ignored, the quieter kind. The kind where the person closest to you has constructed a version of you, convenient, familiar, manageable, and has stopped looking past it. The kind where you begin, gradually, to fit yourself into that version, because it's easier, Because conflict is expensive. Because you tell yourself the things you've set aside are still there, and they are, but they are getting quieter. Richard was not a cruel man. He was a man who had stopped paying attention. And when you stop paying attention to the person you love, you don't see them anymore. You see a role, a function, a comfortable, familiar shape. You see everything except the actual person. Clare had not disappeared. She had simply been waiting patiently and at considerable cost for a room large enough to hold all of her. And when that room arrived, she walked into it without hesitation. Because that is what people do when they have never stopped believing in what they carry. They wait, they keep building, they keep thinking, and when the moment comes, they are ready. So if someone in your life has reduced you to a role, if they have summarized you when you deserve to be known, remember what Clare knew. The work's unseen. The work doesn't disappear because it goes unseen. The knowledge doesn't disappear because no one asks. Looking. You don't disappear because someone stops looking. You are still there, fully, completely, waiting for the room that is large enough. If Clare's story stayed with you, if it reminded you how easy it is to overlook someone, you think you already understand, like this video story stayed with you. If it reminded, have you ever been reduced to something smaller than who you really are? We read every single one. Thank you for being here. I'm Luna. This is Poppy. Until next time.